So Professor Alex Mesoudi is professor of cultural evolution at, I believe, at the Center for Ecology and Conservation at the University of Exeter at Cornwall in the UK. He's also currently president of the Cultural Evolution Society. Professor Mesoudi published one of the early modern books on cultural evolution. There it is at my bookshelf. In 2011, titled Cultural Evolution, How Darwinian Theory Can Explain Human Culture and Synthesize the Social Sciences. Since then, he's published at least one co-authored book and many articles, including some on large data sets and some on models. But recently, he seems to have concentrated more on the general topic that he's going to talk to us about today. So the title of his talk is Studying Cultural Evolution in the Lab, Some Experimental Findings Related to Prestige Bias and Information Sharing. So if the rest of you will turn off your mic and pictures now, wait, and welcome Professor Mesoudi, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Marion, for the kind introduction, and apologies for having to postpone it due to illness to this week, but thank you for coming. So as Marion said, I'm going to be talking about I guess what I do for most of my research, which is studying cultural evolution in the lab. I say in the lab, but more recently it's mostly online, so it's not a physical lab, but lots of experiments we've been doing online. And I wanted to tell you specifically about some experimental findings relating to prestige bias, which has received a lot of attention in cultural evolution, and also a new topic, information sharing. But I thought I'd start just with a few comments about experiments. Why do we need to do experiments? Well, first of all, the broad field of cultural evolution, because I'm aware not everybody will be so familiar with it. So going back to Darwin, we're in the Darwin Club, so thought I'd start with a quote from Darwin. So Darwin, soon after he came up with his theory of biological evolution, commented that it could be applied to cultural evolution, specifically languages. This is a quote from The Descent of Man that I use frequently. So he wrote, "The formation of different languages and of distinct species are curiously parallel. We find in distinct languages striking homologies due to community of descent. We see variability in every tongue, and new words are continually cropping up. The survival or preservation of certain favored words in the struggle for existence is natural selection." So not looks a bit like a bit like selection, kind of can be sort of as a metaphor for cultural change as selection, but just says is natural selection. So he argued changes in language are governed by the same processes that govern the evolution of biological species. And I highlighted here descent or inheritance, variability, variation, selection, the key ingredients of Darwinian evolution applied to language, but also tools and technology and beliefs and norms and various other socially transmitted traits. Now, it kind of the idea of cultural evolution kind of went on the back burner for quite a while for various reasons, distortions due to into social Darwinism or eugenics and sort of misuses of evolutionary theory. So the social sciences didn't really adopt cultural evolution until this groundwork that was laid in the 1970s and 1980s, I think, by two pairs of mathematical modelers, Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza and Mark Feldman at Stanford, and Rob Boyd and Peter Richerson at the University of California, and their papers in the 70s and books in the 80s, where they used the mathematical tools of population genetics to formalize cultural evolution. So taking Darwin's ideas of cultural evolution and formalizing them in the same way that Fisher, Wright, Haldane, and others did in the 30s and 40s for biological evolution. And these models were often fearsomely complex and quite demanding to understand. The text in the books, those books are very good, but quite complex models trying to understand the processes of, say, vertical and horizontal transmission, conformity along the bottom there, copying the most common trait. And for a while after that, that was cultural evolution, lots of theory, also philosophy. as well, but lots of formal models, which you can see as on the spectrum from very high internal validity and low external validity through to, on the other side, low internal validity, high external validity. Models are on the left hand there. So models have high internal validity. They're precise and compact and logical by design, but they have low external validity. They're as good as the model as assumptions about the phenomena, the real world phenomena that they are purporting to describe. And then in the 80s and 90s, we started having more empirical work in the field of cultural evolution. So field work by people like Barry Hewlett in the 80s, looking at cultural transmission among the Arca people, or work in history and archaeology by people like Stephen Shannon, where obviously you have much lower internal validity. You can't randomly assign sort of small scale hunter-gatherer peoples to different conditions. You can't rerun history multiple times to see if patterns are random or due to selection, but there's high external validity. You're actually looking at real people behaving, or in the case of archaeology, the remains of real people. So experiments are kind of halfway in between these two extremes. So they combine the high some of the aspects of the high internal validity of models with some of the aspects of the high external validity of empirical fieldwork or archaeology. And in the early 2000s, experiments started to be used in the field of cultural evolution by people like Tatsuya Kameda, Richard McElreath, and other people at UC Davis. I had a couple of early experimental studies in the early 2000s where we were trying to test the theoretical models coming out of the field of cultural evolution in the lab. And so, like I said, experiments combine things like control over external conditions. You can randomly assign people to different treatments. You can manipulate variables. You can generate complete data in a way that you don't have with, say, archaeology. But unlike models, pure theoretical models, you've got real people's behavior and cognition. And if psychologists have discovered anything, it's that often real people don't behave in ways that your theories predict that they should do. So there's huge value in testing the theories coming out of cultural evolution with actual real people's behavior and cognition, which introduces all kinds of constraints and tests. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk about two recent studies where we've tried to do exactly this, test cultural evolution theories in the lab. The first was led by Charlotte Brand, who you can see there, funded by the Leverhulme Trust, but also in collaboration with Stephen Heap and Tom Morgan, about prestige. And the second there, led by Angel Jimenez, funded by the Templeton Foundation and the Cultural Evolution Society. So we'll start with the first one there about prestige bias. Now, so back in 2001, Joseph Henrich and Francisco Gil White published a very influential paper called The Evolution of Prestige. So this received a lot of attention, and lots of studies since have studied prestige and prestige bias social learning in particular. So their argument in this paper was that in most species, social status is attained via dominance. So dominance they defined as physical coercion or control over resources that others have access to. Many other social species do this. Chimpanzees have strict dominance hierarchies based on mostly on physical coercion. Humans also have dominance with schoolyard bullies or bullies in the workplace or elsewhere. We also have social status that's derived from physical coercion. But Henrich and Gil White argued that much human social status is additionally derived from what they called prestige. So prestige they defined as expertise or skill or knowledge that people acquire during their lifetimes, And prestigious individuals receive freely confer deference, say social favors or material goods, in exchange for access to their superior skills and knowledge. So you might think of, say, Jane Goodall, as I put here, or Stephen Hawking. You know, these people are not physically formidable. They couldn't win fights with many other people, but they have huge social status, huge prestige within our societies. People listen to them, they look up to them, they listen to their opinions on various topics. They receive lots of benefits because of their prestige, and this is derived from their expertise, their skill, their knowledge, rather than their physical formidability, as I just said. And so, yeah, unlike other species, humans have this prestige system of social status. And Henrich and Gilwhite thought through the consequences of this prestige system of social status. So they argued that once prestige hierarchies emerge, people can use indirect prestige cues to identify high skill or high knowledge demonstrators from whom to learn. So prestige, you get prestige by other people copying you. Sometimes it's difficult to know who to copy through directly assessing their knowledge. If you think of Stephen Hawking, you know, not many of us really understand the quantum theory or the black hole physics that caused him to acquire his status. Rather, we know that he's prestigious because of indirect cues of other people who know more about physics than us, giving him prestige. So examples of these indirect cues might be seeing somebody else being copied, or somebody else being watched, or being paid attention to, or being listened to, or even titles or qualifications or other social markers. These are indirect cues to knowing who it is that has the best knowledge or best skill in your population, in your society. And these are easier and cheaper to use compared to, as I mentioned, directly assessing others' skills or knowledge. Or in some cases, if it's opaque knowledge like quantum physics, it's just not possible to assess on your own. So you confer prestige. You learn from the person who has acquired, who you see other people copying, or you see other people paying attention to. So this leads to two predictions that actually had never been tested in the years since 2001. We wanted to test in this study. So two basic predictions. Firstly, that these indirect prestige cues should be used to select learning models, people to learn from, only if they are indirectly related to knowledge. So if these prestige cues are divorced or disconnected from knowledge or skill in some way, then they shouldn't be used. But if they are indirectly linked to high knowledge or high skill, then people should use prestige cues in that situation. And secondly, indirect prestige cues should be used to select learning models only if direct cues of knowledge are unavailable. So if you are an expert in quantum physics and you can assess the knowledge of different people, then you shouldn't bother with indirect cues like who everybody is watching or who people are copying, because you know who the most knowledgeable person is. So you should only use prestige cues, firstly, when they are to some degree reliable, and secondly, when direct cues of knowledge are unavailable. Because otherwise, why bother with indirect cues that can be a bit noisy? So we tested this in an online real-time group-based experiment. We had 225 participants. These are members of the public, not students, recruited via the service Prolific. They were all put into groups of between 5 and 10 people, interacting, like I said, in real time. No deception, no manipulation of answers or anything. So observing genuine copying behavior. And every participant answered questions in a general knowledge quiz. So I'll show you. These are two examples of the questions that people were asked. And they were paid in proportion to their performance in the task, so incentivized to get things right. So we had geography questions: in which country is the red dot located here, Belize or Guatemala? Art questions: who painted this picture? So it was all multiple choice, as you can see here. And people could answer directly if they thought they knew the answer. So that was asocial learning. and so they could directly click either Belize or Guatemala in this example. If they were correct, they got a point. If they were incorrect, they got 0 points. Or this is where the prestige comes in, or they could ask somebody else, or ask someone else. This was the social learning. So they could click the ask someone else button rather than answering directly, and then they got to see different other members of their group who were also interacting or also doing the quiz at the same time. So remember, all genuine things, no deception was involved. So if somebody clicked ask someone else, this is the social learning condition, they saw in different conditions that I'll explain on the next slide, but they could see 3 other players, and they could those players were described by 3 different kinds of cues. So on the left here, it could be under some conditions, it could be an irrelevant cue. So this is the player ID number, which is completely random. They were told these are randomly generated, so it's not really tied to skill or knowledge or prestige or anything. It's just a random number. It just doesn't give any additional information. This is our kind of control information. Or they could see a knowledge queue. So this is the number of questions that those other people had got correct up to that point. So in this case, you got 12, a 12, and a 20. So this is, again, genuine information. As people were answering, it kept track of how many they were getting correctly. So this is the direct knowledge. Or the third possibility is they were shown the prestige queue. So in this study, we define prestige as the number of times a player was themselves copied previously. So here we got 3 players. This person was copied 10 times previously. This person was copied 1 time. This person was copied 5 times. Chosen means when previously someone had said ask someone else and chose them as the demonstrator. So 3 kinds of cues: irrelevant knowledge, direct knowledge, and indirect prestige. So then each participant experienced one of 3 conditions. So it's a between groups design. Some participants were in the control condition. So in the control condition, we had round 1. So they had 40 questions, during which people, if they chose to copy somebody else, they were shown the irrelevant cue, the random player ID of the demonstrators. So that didn't really give them any useful information. But then in round 2, the other 60 questions, they could choose either, when they chose to copy somebody else, they could either choose to see the player IDs of the demonstrators, the irrelevant cue again, or the number of times the demonstrators were copied in round 1 of this condition, in this round 1. This is an unreliable prestige cue because it was irrelevant to start with. So there's no connection with knowledge or skill or anything. It's just as unreliable as the irrelevant cue because it is based on the irrelevant cue. So here we're predicting in round 2, participants shouldn't show any preference between the irrelevant cue and the unreliable prestige cue because they're pretty much the same thing. In the prestige condition, participants in this condition in round 1 saw the scores of the demonstrators so far. So they got the direct knowledge cue at the beginning. And then in round 2, they could see either the player IDs, the irrelevant cue, or they could choose to see the number of times the demonstrators were copied in round 1. So this is a reliable prestige cue now because in round 1, the copying was based on knowledge. So assuming people were copying the most knowledgeable person in round 1, the most knowledgeable people should also be the people who are most often copied, and that's what they could see here. So this is when prestige is useful. So here, for this condition, in round 2, participants should choose to view the reliable prestige cue more often than the irrelevant cue because it's irrelevant, and the prestige is reliable because it's based on knowledge. Finally, in the knowledge condition, round 1 was people could choose to copy based on the scores of the demonstrators so far as before. And then in round 2, they could either choose, they could either copy based on the knowledge queue again, so the scores of the demonstrators from round 1, or the number of times the demonstrators were copied in round 1. So this is still a reliable prestige queue, but actually here we're pitting the reliable prestige queue, the copying, against the knowledge queue. So the prestige queue is based on knowledge, but in this condition, actually, you've got the direct knowledge queue here. So you don't actually need to use the indirect prestige queue, the copying queue. You should just use the direct knowledge queue. So in round 2, we're predicting participants should choose to view the knowledge queue more often than the reliable prestige queue. So note, we're not predicting that prestige should be used all the time, or people should blindly copy prestigious individuals as we've defined them. We're predicting that people should be pretty sensitive as to when they use prestige queues. So in the control condition, prestige is unreliable, they shouldn't pick it or should have no preference. In the prestige condition, they should use prestige queues because it's better than the irrelevant queue and it's based on knowledge. And in the knowledge condition, they should pick knowledge queues, not the prestige queue, because prestige is an indirect queue of knowledge, but you've got the direct queue, so why use the indirect queue when you've got the direct queue? So this is what we found. So these are results from a binomial logistic regression that I won't go into the details of. Basically, the outcome here is whether you chose prestige over the alternatives. This is I guess, a forest plot of the regression outcomes, the model estimate. These are the 3 conditions: the control condition, the prestige condition, and the knowledge condition. The dot here is the mean. The mean of the estimate, and these are the 89% credible intervals, the confidence intervals of the estimate. And you can see here, so in the control condition, and I should say, so this is 0. So if the confidence intervals cross the dotted 0 line, then we would interpret that as no effect. If it's over here, it's a positive effect. If it's over here, it's a negative effect. So we can see in the control condition where we predicted no preference, that was supported, so the error bars cross 0. So no preference between choosing the prestige queues or the alternative, which in this case was the random queues when the prestige was based on random queues itself. In the prestige condition, people clearly picked prestige queues because it was prestige versus random, which was not reliable. And in the knowledge condition, people were clearly picking knowledge queues. So in this case, this is prestige, this is a knowledge queue. So people were not picking prestige, therefore they were picking the direct knowledge queue. So it fitted all 3 of our predictions that people only use prestige, indirect prestige queues, when it's reliable in some way, not when it's unreliable, and when it's based on, and when direct knowledge queues are unavailable, in which case those direct queues are used. So some other sort of secondary findings. We found the emergence of prestige or knowledge hierarchies. So this graph shows the number of times people were copied, so a measure of their the kind of prestige, if you like. Different participants, different colors of different groups that we ran. You can see in the prestige and the knowledge condition, you had small numbers of participants or group members in each group tended to be very copied a lot. Most people were not really copied that much. So you saw these clear prestige or knowledge hierarchies emerging. In the control condition, not so much because it was all kind of random. But you saw these small number of frequently copied high prestige or high knowledge participants spontaneously emerging in the groups. Like I said, there's no deception, so this was all completely spontaneously generated by the participants, and differences in general knowledge presumably at the heart of it. Additional findings, so when knowledge queues were chosen, participants preferentially copied the highest scoring demonstrator in 94% of the time, which kind of makes sense. When prestige queues were chosen, participants preferentially copied the most copied demonstrator 98% of the time. So this is when you have a choice between those 3 other group members, you're choosing the most knowledgeable or the most prestigious, as we would expect. There was more copying using any of the queues in the prestige and the knowledge conditions than in the control condition. Again, as you would expect, because the former are reliable, the control condition is not reliable. And participants scored slightly higher in the prestige and knowledge conditions than the control condition. Not a huge, not a huge difference there. Probably because copying was generally quite low, which you tend to find often in experiments. People probably could have scored higher if they did a bit more copying, but there was a slight advantage to using prestige and knowledge cues compared to the control condition. So to conclude that study, so as predicted by Henrich and Gilwhite's original theory, even though it hadn't been tested since their 2001 paper, people do what the theory predicts. So they only use indirect prestige cues when those prestige cues are related to knowledge, going back to some point in the past, but also when direct knowledge cues are unavailable. So people are behaving adaptively. So this contradicts some earlier studies where participants used indirect prestige cues even when they were unreliable, or you see some claims that informational cascades can occur via blind copying of accidentally prestigious individuals. So some people accidentally get copied at the beginning and then everybody blindly copies those people. Slightly different setups or different assumptions in those information cascade papers, but sometimes it's linked to prestige. But generally, claims that people are blindly copy prestigious individuals are not really supported by our experiment. People are pretty sensitive to the reliability of different cues and can flexibly switch between different cues when choosing from whom to learn. And a follow-up study that I won't talk about today, but you can have a look at if you're interested, found that prestige cues were sensitive to the domain. So in our quiz, we had different categories like art or geography. So we used that as the kind of like the domain of knowledge in this case, and we varied the score that people got. So we showed domain-specific scores. So this is somebody's score on the art round. Do you want to copy them on this art question? Or this is somebody's score on the geography round. Do you want to copy them on the art question? So we matched or mismatched the domain, the knowledge domain, and we found that again people were pretty sensitive to the domain. So domain-specific copying was most often preferred. So you copy somebody in the art for an art question based on their score in the other art questions, which are slightly better than domain general. So you copy somebody based on their global score, which is better than the other domain, which is better than random. So again, people are sensitive to where people got their prestige, their prestige, their number of times that they got copied, which domain, which quiz topic they got that prestige, that reputation. Okay, so that was the prestige study. So now I'll move on to the information sharing study, where we tried to look at whether partner choice facilitates information sharing. So this is a topic that I've been getting interested recently. So information sharing, because it tends to be kind of neglected a little in the field of cultural evolution so far. So in most cultural evolution models and experiments, demonstrators or models essentially have no choice whether to let others copy them. So that was exactly the case in the prestige experiment that I just talked about. So in that prestige experiment, much like many other experiments, and indeed the assumptions of many models, we're looking at who people choose to copy. So we present 3 other group members that people can choose who to copy. Do you copy the 12, or the 20? Those people have no say in whether they are copied or not. So basically, we're assuming free access to all demonstrators. So if somebody picks the 20 correct person, then they can see the answer of the 20 correct person, and that gets added to their score. But the 20 correct person has no say in whether they can share their information with the person clicking on them. And the same in lots of other experiments. Usually it's, do people copy successful people, or do people conform to the majority, or do people copy older people? So all of these so-called social learning strategies, it's usually focused on who people choose to copy rather than whether the demonstrator allows that person to copy them or not. And this kind of ignores very interesting cooperative dilemma that's at the heart of cultural evolution, particularly cumulative cultural evolution. So if innovators produce some knowledge at some cost, so maybe there's not so much cost in knowing the correct answer to the quiz questions, but in real life, usually it costs time or effort or some kind of currency to produce knowledge. But if social learners can copy that knowledge at less or no cost, then you can kind of see that as information free riding. So the social learners are copying the costly knowledge from the innovators, benefiting from that knowledge without bearing the cost of the innovation of coming up with the idea or the discovery in the first place. So that becomes a kind of classic cooperative dilemma. So innovators, if they're aware of this, might respond by refusing to innovate further. So if somebody else is stealing all your information, you might think, oh, why should I bother putting all this effort into coming up with valuable knowledge if everyone else is just benefiting by coming along and copying me? So they could stop innovating, or they might try to conceal or protect their knowledge, which in our paper we call information hoarding. So you might erect barriers or prevent other people from copying your beneficial information in some way. So in both cases, whether innovators refuse to innovate further, or if they conceal and protect their knowledge, in both cases, cumulative cultural evolution slows or halts. So cumulative cultural evolution is all about people building on previous inventions and discoveries, standing on the shoulders of previous giants in the field. But if the previous generations are either refusing to innovate or concealing or protecting their knowledge, then there's no possibility of cumulative cultural evolution. So that's kind of bad for cumulative cultural evolution, and many people argue that's the sort of secret of our species' success. And so I think it's an interesting question how we've solved this this cooperative dilemma, because obviously we do have cumulative cultural evolution, and so how have we solved these problems? And we can see in throughout history or sort of cross-culturally lots of evidence for these being problems. So favorite example of mine is medieval Venice, where expert glassmakers were confined to the islands of Murano by the Venetian city-state, prevented from leaving Murano and taking their knowledge to other countries. And you have cases of expert glassmakers being smuggled out in coffins to the Netherlands and the UK, and that's how glassmaking knowledge actually took off. But certainly there was information hoarding on the part of the Venetian city-state. We can think of patents as a kind of mechanism which prevent this. So you've got a patent right over something that you've put effort into and cost into producing, that other people have to pay, so that compensates the innovator potentially. Joel Mokyr, I believe, has given a talk in this series, recently won the Nobel Prize. His book, A Culture of Growth, is a very nice basically argument for this, and arguing that the Enlightenment and subsequent Industrial Revolution happened because of a shift from information hoarding and information free riding to information sharing as a result of reputation. So people like Newton and Francis Bacon and other people, suddenly they started writing to each other in a pan-European network of scientists and inventors, and they got reputations for releasing their knowledge to other inventions to other inventors and scientists. And so you got the open sharing of information where previously information hoarding was common. So I think it's an interesting question, what mechanisms allowed human societies to shift from free riding and hoarding information to open sharing of information, facilitating technological growth. So in an earlier paper, I won't talk about today, this is a modeling paper, we tried to think about solutions to this dilemma by borrowing mechanisms from the evolution of cooperation literature in biology. So one possibility is kin selection, so you share information with your genetic relatives, so you share information with your offspring, with your siblings, so that you benefit them, so all your genes are benefiting from sharing information preferentially with them. Reciprocity is a possibility, so you might share information with others who have shared with you in return. So I'll share information with you if you share it back. Possibly group selection. It's usually a controversial argument, but you could imagine how groups of information sharers might outcompete groups of non-sharers. If all the sharers are kind of benefiting from each other's knowledge, they might outcompete other groups. But the one that Moki talks about in his book, and the one that I'll talk about for the rest of the talk today, is mechanism is reputation-based partner choice. So this is where information sharers get reputations for sharing. So you share your knowledge with others, and you get a reputation for sharing. And others preferentially share with everybody else on the basis of sharing reputations. So you get the benefit back from your costly innovation. So the costs of innovation are outweighed by the benefits of receiving beneficial information from others. And so that's what Moki argues happened in the Enlightenment. So people like Newton started sharing and got reputations for sharing. You can't get reputations if you don't share. But then other people preferentially shared with only other people who also shared. They didn't share with hoarders or people who stole information. And so that's how the partner choice system worked. Okay, so that's what we tested in this experiment. So here, participants played an online space exploration game. So we tried to get rid of sort of priors or preconceptions about information sharing and patents and things like that. So we tried to make it relatively novel. So participants played an online space exploration game. They were a space explorer. They had to discover new elements on an unfamiliar planet. They were randomly assigned to a group of 8 people interacting in real time. So again, no deception, people actually interacting in a group of people, of other participants. Total N was 716 across 4 studies that I'll talk about briefly. Study 1 was replicated in China, the UK and China, studies 2 to 4 in the UK only. And they were paid in proportion to their performance in the task, just like the previous study. So participants here made 2 key decisions, really. The first decision on every trial was whether to innovate or not. So you can see screenshots of the task here. So do you want to use your rock analysis unit to attempt to find a new element, yes or no? And then innovation was costly. So innovation cost 10 credits, and it was not perfect. So you had a 75% chance of discovering a new element. We didn't tell participants that it was 75% specifically, but we just said there is a chance that the rock analysis unit does not discover a new element. And then if you're successful, this is the rock analysis unit. It's the only time I've used AI in my research to generate these cool images, but that's the rock analysis unit. And then if you discover correctly, if you successfully discover a new element, that gives you plus 20 credits on each subsequent round. So then you know that element, you can use it, you can exploit it subsequently. So innovation is costly, but you don't have to do it. But if you don't do it, there's no chance of discovering something that might give you a benefit for the rest of the experiment. The second decision is whether to share or not. So share your knowledge of the elements that you've discovered so far. So again, do you want to let another participant see your elements? Actually, in the experiment, we didn't use the word share or cooperation or anything like that to avoid priming people with sort of sharing or cooperative motivations. So do you want to let another participant see your elements, yes or no? Sharers get +1 reputation point per element copied by another player. If you choose not to share, there's a small cost of 5 credits. That's like the cost of the cost of hoarding your information, setting up some kind of barrier to stop somebody else copying you. And if somebody did choose to let another participant see their elements, they could see all the other participants choose one of those other players in their group based on their reputation score. So this was the partner choice. So if partner choice is operating, we would predict that people should choose to copy preferentially with people like player 4 here, who has the highest reputation score. So that indicates that they've themselves, player 4 themselves, has shared previously in previous rounds, and so you're kind of paying back their sharing by giving them your elements. And then you get told what your reputation score. You get told how other people, how many elements other people learnt from you, and your overall reputation score there. And finally, there was feedback and strategy copying. So after your 2 decisions, you receive your 20 credits per element that you know, minus the costs of innovation if you chose to innovate, and sharing if you chose to share. And you were also shown the decisions and performance of another randomly chosen player. So in this case, it says another random player did use their rock analysis unit, did not choose to let another player see their elements, and earn more credits than you. So the idea here was if somebody else was not sharing and they were doing better than you, then you might copy the not sharing strategy. So your feedback allows reinforcement learning, which we modeled. I won't talk about, but we modeled their reinforcement learning. So if you make some decisions and your score goes up, you should do that more often. And this allowed for payoff bias strategy copying. So if you see some other people are not sharing and they're doing well, you should copy their strategy of not sharing. Okay, so like I said, if you've got 2 decisions, makes 4 strategies. So if you innovate and you share, you're an open innovator. If you innovate but you don't share, you're a closed innovator. If you don't innovate and you share, you're an open non-innovator. If you don't innovate and you don't share, you're a closed non-innovator. So interested in the frequencies of these 4 strategies that participants were using over at first 20, then we extended it to 30 trials. So this is the results of the first study, the UK and China, participants in the UK and China. These graphs show trial along the bottom and the proportion of participants following those 4 strategies over time. And you can see there were strong priors at the very beginning. People were preferring open innovation, and they stuck with that pretty much all the way through. So around 80% frequency here. In China, started off slightly lower, but went up to about 80% there. But not much difference really between the UK and China there in strategy choices. And this shows partner choice. So we visualized this by showing the frequency with which, when they could choose to share, when they chose to share, the frequency with which they chose to share with different players who were ranked differently in terms of their reputation. So 1 here means that this is the frequency with which participants shared with the top ranked reputation for sharing player in their group. 2 would be they shared with the second highest reputation ranked person, down to 7, the lowest reputation person. And you can see here, and so the pink bars are the overall frequencies. The dark bars here is what you would expect through purely by random choice. If somebody was choosing at random, this is what you would expect. It's not all the same, because if you have ties, that makes these lower ranks less likely. But basically, we see some partner choice, so people are more likely than random to choose to share with the top reputation person in their group. But we also see quite high frequencies, relatively speaking, of sharing with other people, with lower ranked reputation people as well. So actually in the UK case, 10% of people were choosing to share with the bottom ranked person for reputation, which is kind of not what we would predict through partner choice. And we quantified partner choice with this parameter that I won't go into the derivation of really, but which we call beta rep, which is the tendency to share with high reputation group mates. So it's how skewed this graph is, basically ranges from 0 to infinity. So if it's 0, it's completely random. People are sharing completely at random and not showing partner choice. If it's infinity or higher it is, the more skewed it is towards sharing with the top ranked person, which is what we're predicting based on the partner choice mechanism. So you can see here 0.14, 0.29, pretty low strength of partner choice. But this conceals a quite interesting variation across the different participants. So these, I've got three distributions for three participants that I've picked who did the experiments. This is somebody who was employing strong partner choice, so their beta rate was 3.88, so very high. They were almost always sharing with the top ranked person. This is what we wanted people to do, really, if they were doing partner choice. This is what they should be doing, and hardly ever with anybody else. But only 20 to 30% of participants showed this strong partner choice. Most participants, 70 to 80%, showed either weak partner choice, which looks a bit like the overall pattern. So mostly, so lots of top-ranked sharing, but also quite a bit of low-ranked sharing. Or some people were doing no partner choice, in this case, almost reverse partner choice, preferentially sharing with low-ranked participants. So that's quite interesting. So it seems like you only need a small proportion of people who are showing strong partner choice in order to get in order to maintain open innovation, everybody sharing at high frequencies. So overall, strong priors and continuing preferences for open innovation, this innovation plus sharing, is what we saw in the experiment. And partner choice was not random overall, it was relatively weak, and many participants showed random or indiscriminate partner choice. So then we did a second study trying to get people to, or trying to reduce that frequency of sharing, wanted to make people nastier, basically, less likely to share with other people, rather than just everybody indiscriminately sharing, most people indiscriminately sharing. So we removed the cost of hoarding, which was previously 5 credits. So now if you choose not to share with anybody, there's no consequences. You can hoard for free. We tried to increase the potency of the payoff biased strategy copying. So previously we just showed one randomly chosen group members strategy and score. Now we showed a full leaderboard. So hopefully they could see, if you're selfishly hoarding, you're actually doing better than everybody else, and they could potentially copy that strategy. We made the maximum reputation increase for sharing per round to 1 rather than the number of traits shared. So we did this because I think we thought maybe people were sharing with everybody indiscriminately, because if they shared with somebody and that person learned like 6 elements, then they got a reputation increase of 6, which really increased their reputation. So we wanted to avoid that, because that might encourage indiscriminate sharing. So now if you share with anybody, irrespective of how many traits, how many elements you share, you just get a +1 for reputation. Increase the number of rounds from 20 to 30 to try and get longer term dynamics. And we also added another condition, where, as before, we had a high benefit of innovation condition where you got +20 per element, but we added a low benefit of innovation condition where you just get +5 per element per trial, which should make innovation less attractive. So this is study 2, same format as before. In the high benefit of innovation, pretty much the same results as previously, despite all of our nudges to try and get people to do the alternative, more selfish strategies. So pretty much the same as before. High frequency of open innovation. The tendency to, or the strength of partner choice was slightly higher, but not really much. You're still getting people sharing with 4th, 5th, 6th ranked people. When we reduce the benefit of innovation, it does reduce the frequency of open innovation slightly, but they switch over to this one, which is open non-innovation. So they're still sharing. They're just not innovating because it has less of a benefit. So we're not getting the closed hoarding strategies increase as we were trying to get to. So study 3, again, trying to get people to be a bit more selfish, or at least pit closed and open innovation against each other. So we thought maybe in the previous experiments, it just wasn't an opportunity to learn that closed innovators or closed non-innovators might do better by, if everybody's indiscriminately sharing information, then you might get that information and you can not share with anybody else, and so you do even better. So we added 1 bot per group who, in the high benefit of innovation condition, always innovated and never shared. They were an information hoarder, so they innovated but kept it to themselves. And in the other low benefit of innovation condition, they never innovated and never shared, so they didn't do anything, so they didn't innovate, but just relied on everybody else giving them information. And this is the results along the bottom here compared to study 2 that I just showed you, and not much difference again. So in study 3 we got high frequency of open innovation in both conditions, similar kind of distribution of partner choice strengths as we saw in the first experiment. But interestingly, zero reputation bots were largely excluded from sharing due to partner choice. So this shows in red here in each of the groups, the red bar is the bot, the selfish bot who never shared. You can see, and this is the frequency with which they were shared with, and usually they were excluded from sharing. So they were the bottom ranked sharer. People were not sharing with the bot who was not in themselves sharing. I should say also they weren't participants weren't aware that they were bots, and we checked that as well. They thought they were genuine participants. And I'm slightly running out of time, so I'll rush through study 4, where we removed reputation and partner choice entirely. So here we removed the reputations, the reputation scores. If participants chose to share, the computer picked another player entirely at random with whom to share. So here, people shouldn't share because it's completely random. You're going to get something back whether you share or not. So why share with others when you can just do better by hoarding your information? This is what we found at the bottom. Compared to the previous studies, we still found that open innovation was the most frequent strategy, but now we got the equivalent closed strategy. So this is closed innovation here towards the end, having a similar frequency as the open innovation. And here the dark green, the closed non-innovation, by the end is kind of rivaling the open innovation here. So open innovation was noticeably lower and starting to overlap with the non-sharing equivalent strategy. Now, this is the variation across groups. So in some groups, we found what we found before. Open innovation was doing better, but in some groups, certainly. So the previous slide was the averages. This is within each group. In some groups, closed innovators were most frequent, like this group and this group, for example. So when we model the frequency of open, or each of the strategies in the last quarter, last 25% of trials, you see in the studies 1 to 3, open innovation was clearly the most common throughout. I guess in that one case you got open non-innovation, so information sharing always was the most frequent. But in the last study where we removed reputation, now we've got overlap between the open innovation and the closed strategy, closed innovation or closed non-innovation. So it was declining. Open innovation was declining and was no longer significantly higher than the equivalent non-sharing strategy. Okay, so to summarize that study, so we saw that participants had, for us, unexpectedly strong priors. We weren't expecting people to come into the experiment with such strong predispositions to share information. We thought they might be a bit more sneaky or suspicious than that, but they did. And stable preferences throughout most of the studies for open innovation, which is costly innovation plus information sharing. In studies 1 and 2, partner choice was generally weak, but well, didn't need to be very strong because everyone was effectively an open innovator, and that small minority of people who had strong partner choice maybe was causing everybody to stick with open innovation. In study 3, where we introduced the bots, partner choice was pretty, again, similarly weak, but strong enough to exclude non-sharing bots, closed bots from being recipients of sharing. And in study 4, we made partner choice random by design, and open innovation dropped to levels comparable to non-sharing closed strategies. So in conclusion there, strong preferences for information sharing, maintained, we think, at least partly by reputation-based partner choice. It's not strong, but things are going on, particularly in the study 3 and 4 with the bots and taking it away. May support real-world cumulative cultural evolution, because in all of these cases, number of elements was accumulating. I didn't show it, but number of elements was accumulating because most people were openly innovating and openly sharing with others. Okay, final conclusions. from both of those, really. So I think experiments are useful for testing predictions from theories of cultural evolution in light of real people's psychological constraints and capacities, and also developmentally acquired norms, which is probably what the priors for information sharing that we saw, where people were bringing those into the experiment based on things they'd learned in their real lives. I think we find that people generally behave adaptively, flexibly, and in line with predictions. So people don't blindly copy prestigious individuals. They only use it when it's the best available option in their particular condition. They seem to use partner choice in some way to maintain information sharing and exclude non-sharing bots. But these mismatches, the unexpected things, are also useful, actually probably more important than where it fits. Things like the strong priors for information sharing, or the many people not using reputations at all, don't really have a handle on why the majority of participants were showing very weak partner choice and even sharing with low reputation people. There's lots of work to be done figuring out the source of that inter-individual variation in sharing strategies. Okay, with that, I will thank the co-authors of those two studies, as you can see here, and the funders that I mentioned earlier. And both of those papers are available on my website, which you can see there. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Mesoudi. Now we can take any questions or comments that people would like. Please raise your hand. Brian Smith, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So practically oriented question, Alex. Thanks for the talk. That was really interesting, and the experimental design was lovely, really, really elegant. I'm interested to know how your results might help to explain real-world behaviour. And the thought that was running through my head as you talk was, how do we see, or are there different explanations for behaviour among when lay people look to experts for influence, versus when expert populations, let's say groups of academics or something, within an area of expertise, look to each other for influence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I guess it speaks to things like misinformation in social media, maybe, or people argue that misinformation or cascades of misinformation, false information spread on social media because people are just retweeting what Donald Trump says about vaccines or something like that. I guess our results suggest that people are not quite as blindly willing to retweet things based on other people's prestige. We've done some other experiments actually on social media spreading. People are a bit more sensitive and a bit more discerning, and it's more about sort of political beliefs and rather than just sort of blindly magnifying whatever prestigious individuals say. So I think it has implications for that, and often you see that those kind of claims being made that that all of this is sort of celebrity driven or politician driven. I think people are a bit smarter than that, basically, to just go along with what people say in social media. But yeah, I guess. And also, I guess we did the domain specific study, the follow-up study, which shows that people are also sensitive to the particular domains of people say, Stephen Hawking making proclaimants about politics or tax systems or things like that, which he sometimes did, or religion, things like that. Actually, I think people are a bit more sensitive to where people got their prestige from. Usually, it's people have pre-existing beliefs, and then they might agree with Stephen Hawking if he happens to agree with them, rather than sort of changing their opinions because a physicist has said something about politics. I think people are a bit less gullible maybe than is sometimes made out in that situation. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Ugo, do you have a question or a comment?
Yes. well, for the first model, you have that prestige is really derived from the experiment itself. So it's internal to. Now, the problem is that often prestige is external to the game that you are playing. So you come directly with the title or something like this. So perhaps it would be interesting to have experiments where people, have got this type of title. People know that in the experiment somebody is a professor of geography or something like this, and this is could be a check, for prestige. For the second model, it really depends on the context, because I can see that you get this interesting result that you tend to share, the strong tends to share with the weak. That is quite interesting. By the way, there was a PhD thesis in Strasbourg that I examined from somebody, Pansini, who made an experiment with monkeys. And basically, they had to open the cage. And when opening the cage, to open the cage, you needed two of them. Okay. And you had always couples of strong and weak. Why? Because for the weak, it was important to stay with the strong, because otherwise they could not open the cage. And for the strong, it was important to choose the weak, because then at the moment of sharing, you could get more. Okay, so then you got weak, strong as a way of cooperating, and you can get this similar mechanism with information sharing, as long as one gets in the end the final result. But then, if your interest then is not in, if you like, owning the result, the physical thing, but is the result itself, as it could have been for Newton or others, and you want, the priority for you is to solve the problem, okay? And then which one gets a certain share of contribution is relatively relevant with the utility that you get from achieving the goal. Then if there is a cost in sharing, then you should expect that you share with the strong, because you go to the result much quicker. If there is no cost in sharing, you will try to share with everybody, because you get the maximum feedback, which is in the end the mechanism of open science. So it really depends on the context, and the problem is how you can have different experiments that somehow simulate this type of real life context, and perhaps you get different results.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all dependent on the context, just like in sort of evolutionary biology, when they model the evolution of cooperation, it's all dependent on the incentives and the group structure and the costs and the benefits of cooperation. Yeah, I guess we wanted to basically test this mechanism, partner choice, in this particular context where people were in small groups and engaging costly innovation and could share in a very simplified way. But yeah, there's lots of ways that you could extend it. I should say also, I mean, people were rewarded monetarily based on their absolute score in the game, so the number of elements or the number of credits that they accumulated. So we kind of ran out of time, but would have liked to have changed it so that people were rewarded based on their relative rank in the group as well, which would have a big effect, I think. Maybe people would be less likely to share information if it was relative payoffs were affecting their score, because then it turns into more of a competitive task. But then you could imagine different groups as well, potentially being allowed to share across different groups rather than just within your group, which we enforce. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can extend it, but we just wanted to come up with a sort of kind of information version of the public goods game to explore these questions. And I think it's quite striking So in the public goods game, there's always free riders. So there's always some small proportion of free riders, and then most people are conditional cooperators, and they respond to the free riders, and you get cooperation gradually declining because nobody wants to be exploited, and so everybody ends up free riding. It was interesting to me that we didn't find that in our information sharing game. We didn't find a spontaneous or small proportion of people who were information hoarders or information free riders who refused to share. Everybody was mostly sharing. Some were sharing based on reputation, some were sharing indiscriminately, but almost everybody was sharing. We didn't find that small proportion of information free riders, and so we didn't see that decline in information. I think that's also something we want to try and explore. Obviously there's differences between information in our game and resources or monetary units or whatever in a public goods game. So if you share your elements with somebody else in my game, you've still got those elements, just like in the real world. If you share information, you've still got that information, whereas in a public goods game, if you put money into the pot, then you no longer have that money. So that basic difference, whether that causes the results that we see, I think that's quite an interesting question. But yeah, the context is always key. And your first question was about external cues of prestige. So we wanted to make it all endogenous. So we wanted to make the prestige completely endogenous to the task, so that people didn't have pre-existing sort of notions of an expert or prior knowledge of people, or sort of external markers of prestige, or even you get, I guess psychologists have studied this for decades, like halo effects and height and various things are sort of markers of prestige to some extent. We wanted to make it all endogenous and test the theory in that sense. But yeah, I guess it would be nice to see those things, right? And we also only studied a specific cue. So frequency of copying is only one potential prestige cue. It could be sort of attention or some of the other cues that I mentioned on one of the earlier slides. So again, lots of different ways in which that could be extended to.
Okay, Jan Willem, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you for the talk. That was really interesting. It's nice to see some experiments. I was sort of wondering about part of your conclusion, especially for the first experiment, where you seem to be quite positive in the theoretical sense, positive in the sense of saying that people were more or less behaving the way that you might expect, and that the way that they were behaving was also quite functional, quite efficient. But for your second, the conclusion for your second set of experiments, you did mention something like evolutionary mismatch. And I was wondering if there might not be a little bit more of the, let's call it mismatch, or let's call it biases or whatever, whether there wasn't a little bit more going on in your first experiment in terms of biases or potential mismatch. Because it seemed to be in your results that where it was completely random, it just had a confidence interval just overlapped with 0. If you could go back to the slide,
sure.
Perhaps then, and I think your conclusion, or at least that's how I think you worded it, if I remember correctly, was okay, we don't find an effect.
Yeah. Well, I guess
you're fairly close to. I mean, is it a power issue? Is it really no effect, or is it a power issue, or? And I mean, yeah, sorry, but no, go ahead.
I mean, it depends on how you define effect, I guess. I mean, it was all pre-registered, so we pre-registered it, and so we said, we find no effect if the 89% credible intervals overlap with 0. But I mean, if we and we chose that because that's Richard McElraith's sort of Bayesian sort of joke about highlighting how 95% is an arbitrary social convention, so he uses 89%. So we could have used a different number, or we, so yeah, I guess that's what we pre-registered. But yeah, I guess it is the mean model estimate is positive, so there's a slight preference for prestige.
And I
Yeah.
think what might be interesting about that is that, I mean, it could well be that these sorts of social heuristics become so strong, and that they to some degree become evolutionary mismatches, that people do apply them when they're in a situation where they're not necessarily very efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And then then it would start becoming indeed a social heuristic that may also misfire. And I would have a tendency to maybe allow for that sort of possibility, even based on your results here. I don't know how you feel about that, but for instance, also on your conclusion slides for this study, I think your second point, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so here you say it contradicts earlier studies because there you did find some biases that were basically people were sort of these social heuristics were misfiring. They're they were being applied in a context where they didn't really work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really think that you can say so strongly that you're contradicting these studies, also given this result we were just looking at? I'm just curious how you see that, because I would find it also quite interesting from an evolutionary point of view that these things can sort of become heuristic that may also misfire because people overuse them. I don't think that would necessarily deny any of the cultural evolution theory if we would find that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, again, like the previous answer, it depends on the context and how costly the deviation is. So I guess in the where are we? In this case, there wasn't really a cost to doing either of them because it was pretty much the same thing. So I guess you could argue, why not do the prestige one, because it's more interesting than just the random ID number. So it might just have been a sort of people got bored of random IDs and so went with the prestige option. But I think, I mean, it's to me, maybe this difference is maybe the stronger one in that case. No, it's not. So here it was knowledge versus prestige. So this was still prestige, but people clearly weren't picking the prestige cue, which was worded exactly the same as in this condition. It was the same cue as in this condition, but the only difference was that the direct knowledge was available, and in that case people went with the direct knowledge. Now you might argue, well, that's kind of also a prestige cue, but a different kind of prestige cue, but they went with the more reliable cue there. So that to me kind of seems like quite good evidence that people are not over applying these biases, which is sometimes a claim made in the cultural evolution literature and social psychology literature as well, that people are, I think, a bit more sensitive to the sources of the biases than is sometimes made out. But maybe I'm straw manning a little bit, and yeah, I guess it depends on the context. And like I said, I was probably a bit unfair on the informational cascades, because usually that's kind of where there's no objective correct answer often. So you might imagine if it's maybe an informational cascade is a bit like this, where if you were to rerun it multiple times, this isn't significant.
Yeah, I think also your distribution, I think it's the next slide where I mean that even in a control condition, there are, there's at least one individual that's big, that is sort of anyway, it's speculative, obviously, maybe with larger N or with. I was just curious how you saw that, because you had this relatively strong conclusion on the next slide. So
yeah.
So thank you.
That's a fair point. I guess it's all kind of half glass empty or half glass full. How you see these things. I was just trying to emphasize how people are a bit more sensitive than is sometimes claimed. But yeah, it's a good point, and it's interesting highlighting this one. Yeah.
Marion, if you will.
Does anyone else want to ask a question? Well, maybe.
Otherwise, there's one other thing, or unless you want to come in yourself, Miriam,
No,
maybe.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was also quite curious in this first study about the effect size seems to be relatively small in terms of how much people actually copy, right?
Yeah, copying is quite
How did you interpret that? Because I wasn't when you were presenting it, I was wondering if this was incentivized, but I think you later made a comment that it was, right? You paid them based on how well
sorry,
they did, right?
I think I forgot to mention that
I know, but you mentioned it later. So it was as an economist, as a behavioral economist would call it, it was incentivized.
Yeah. And they got points for the correct. So if they chose to copy, they got a point if the answer that they copied was correct, and they didn't get a point if the answer that they copied was incorrect.
Right. So there was an incentive to copy the right sort of model.
Yeah.
And was there a cost of copying? I don't remember that in your setup.
No, just
that it takes you longer in the lab. But
well, you just couldn't answer directly. You couldn't do the asocial, and you couldn't guess yourself, and then if you get it wrong, choose to copy. You could either. So I guess copying means that you couldn't answer it directly yourself. Yeah, I mean the frequency of copying was quite low actually. So this is probably where most of the bias comes from. I didn't emphasize it in this talk, but previous studies that I've done and other people have done, we tend to find that copying is a lot less frequent than we expect, and we would expect if people were maximizing their incomes. I don't know. In this case, I'm not sure we ran the analysis. I guess you could have a look at the average correct responses on the trials where people answer on their own to calculate a sort of baseline and see whether. So I guess below average people should be copying and above average people shouldn't be copying, but whether this 14% or 15% is optimal, given that, I don't know. But in previous studies with different designs, I have shown that people could have earned a lot more money if they'd copied more. So there is generally a bias towards asocial learning that seems to be a bit irrational.
So I was wondering how you. So Kevin Leyland and the people around him ran this at some point. They ran a little bit like the original Axelrod tournament for playing Prisoner's Dilemma. They ran something about learning strategies, right? And what I remember from what Leyland says about that is that but also the more general point that they seem to make, or he seems to make, is that people are quite sophisticated in their learning strategy. So when to do asocial learning and when to copy, and then of course also how to copy, which I guess was what this tournament was about. So but how would you say this result speaks to that, if it does at all? But also the last thing on your slide here, because the economic effect in terms of how the additional performance is quite weak. It almost seems to undercut a little bit this conclusion that people are quite efficient in how they learn and how they copy.
Well, they're efficient in how they copy. They were just under efficient in how much they copied, I guess. So I think the difference here is because there was so little copying. So if they'd copied a lot more, then this difference would have got bigger, because that's the only difference between those two. Yeah, the social learning strategies tournament that Kevin ran, I think, so the winning strategies in that tournament were ones that copied the most, that engaged in the most social learning. But I think most of the strategies that were submitted by people were used asocial learning more often. So it's kind of similar to this. So in that strategy, just like in the Axelrod one, different researchers came up with different algorithms, different strategies to submit. Most of those were doing more asocial learning than was turned out to be adaptive, because the winning strategy was one of the few that almost always copied. So I think it kind of fits with these findings that social learning in many setups, not all setups, but in many setups, this one included, is a good strategy to do, as long as you've got high quality information to copy. But people tend not to copy as much as they should do if they were maximizing their fitness. I guess in the strategies tournament, that effect was driven because people kind of internally filtered their behavior. So they discovered different behavioral options, and they displayed the best one that they discovered so far. So when you copy somebody else, you're almost automatically copying the best thing that they've discovered.
Yeah, that's I think one of the mechanisms that
yeah. So which I guess in this case is the same, in this prestige experiment is the same, because people answer as well as they can, so they're not going to get something wrong on the off chance that somebody might copy them, so the other person is copying the wrong answer because they lose out themselves. I guess in the second experiment I showed, that's not the case. So in the second experiment, people can choose to hoard their information. They can choose to innovate and keep their beneficial information, but then they can choose to block other people from copying. So that wasn't a feature of the strategies tournament. So yeah, it'd be interesting to think about how those two link up. I have not thought about that before. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Okay,
Thank you.
Let me throw in one last question if nobody else wants to. You mentioned, in terms of the analogies to biological evolution for cooperation, you mentioned kin selection, reciprocity, group selection. There was one thing you didn't mention, which was Dawkins' greenbeard effects. You should cooperate with others that are like you. Would that play into any of these experiments, do you think?
That's a very good question. I've not thought about them. So I guess greenbeards are...
If you have a green beard, you
genes-
should be altruistic towards others with green beards.
Yeah, phenotypic markers of cooperation.
That's right.
So in this context, it would be some kind of phenotypic marker that you're going to share information with somebody else who also has that phenotypic marker. That's a good question, I guess. So it could be like a tag or something, or I guess people have talked about accents as. I guess they also have to be hard to fake, right? Because if you're a cheater and you've got a green beard, then the whole system collapses. So they have to be hard to fake. So maybe something like an accent. Maybe
that sounds
more likely to share information with other people who sound the same as you, because it's kind of hard to mimic somebody or change your accent or something that's. So it would have to be something that's hard to fake or hard to change. Yeah, it's an
That sounds
interesting
like
question.
a good suggestion.
Yeah, I'd not thought about that. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, well, I guess we'll cut off. I really want to thank you, Professor Mesoudi, for a very interesting talk. I'm sure it's going to be watched by a lot of people down the road in the future on the films, okay? And thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Marion. Thank you.
Thank the rest of you who came.
Thank you, Alex.
Very interesting.
Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.